Hey folks, it's Marvin Cash, the host of The Articulate Fly. On this episode, I'm joined by Brian Kozminski, owner of True North Trout. Kaz shares his fishing journey, what makes Northern Michigan such a special place, and his thoughts on growing the sport and protecting our angling resources. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. But before we get to the interview, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you like the podcast, please tell a friend, and please subscribe and leave us a rating and review in the podcatcher of your choice. It really helps us out. And a shout out to this episode's sponsor. This episode's sponsored by our friends at Norvise. Their motto is, tie better flies faster, and they produce the only vise that truly spins. If you tie articulated patterns, you owe it to yourself to check out their new shank jaws. The first production run sold out in minutes, but Tim and Tyler have reloaded. To check out the new jaws and Norvice's other great products, head over to www.nor-vice.com today. Now, on to our interview. Well, Kaz, welcome to The Articulate Fly.
Good evening. How are we doing?
Just as always, just trying to stay out of trouble. You know, we have a tradition at The Articulate Fly. We always ask all of our guests to share their earliest fishing memory.
Oh, wow. How far back can we go?
As far as you want.
I remember being in like some very sun-bleached red shorts, standing in a lake near Allegan, Michigan, throwing out spinners or bait casters. I can't recall what it was, but I had a whole bunch of bass on a stringer on my side, and I looked down, and there were a couple of water snakes coming at me, and one of them had his mouth on one of the bluegills that I had. So I must have been 8 or 9, 7 or 8, and that's the earliest I recall getting my feet wet. We loved camping as kids, and being on the water from sun up to sundown was the best experience.
Yeah, that's awesome. And when did you come to the dark side of fly fishing?
Oh, specifically, I believe I was 9 years old. Dad and Grandpa took us, my younger brother and I, to a trout pond in Johnson Park near Grand Rapids. And Grandpa was going to teach us how to fly cast. And we had the little box of generic flies from Kmart, you know, the McGinty and the Bumblebee and all the other wet style flies. And Grandpa proceeded to swing it back and snag a couple trees. We went home, though. We caught a couple of rainbows. I went home immediately and pulled out my dad's vise, and I was going to tie the best pellet fly. You know, I'm going to fool the fish and make the best pellet fly. So that was the dark side, began around 9, and it's been instilled since then.
Yeah, there you go. And, you know, who are some of the folks that have mentored you on your fly fishing journey?
Growing up, West Michigan, there's so many people. Swisher, Richards, all these books that I used to read, but there was also the local icons. We got Jerry Regan up in Grayling, and Glenn Blackwood at the Rockford Fly Shop, Ray Schmidt, Barry Andrews, all these old timers that we all looked up to. My stepmom's from Grayling, so I have a lot of cousins that guide for Gates and guide in the Grayling area. So I've had a lot of friends and family that have always been trout bums in one form or another. But a few other guides that we've always looked up to, Matt Zudwig on the Muskegon, Ed McCoy. There's a lot of guys out there that I've always kind of wanted to follow their footsteps, but just pay attention to and do the best you can do.
Yeah, and so obviously we're talking pre-internet. So, you know, what was that like? Were the old timers generous, or did they kind of make you work for it?
They make you work for it, but at the same time, we would usually meet through like a TU fly tying event or any kind of like a fly fishing show. So, you know, you got to remember back in the 90s, people are a little bit more welcoming, and we wanted to get more people involved with TU and the fly fishing public in general. So if you saw 200 people at a fly tying event, that was a great day. Now our numbers have to be somewhere in the thousands to make it worth paying the booth space. It's a totally different world today.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, when did you get the guide bug?
That's kind of an interesting story, because my wife and I moved to Petoskey when my daughter, she's 16 now, she was 1, so that was 16 years ago. And when I hit 40, I went in for a stress test to get my stuff done. And, I had a blockage in my LAD, and my wife said, if there's something you want to do with your life, you should probably get focused and do it. So that's when we bought a boat and started guiding more. I'd always taken people out fishing just to introduce them to the sport, get them involved in fly fishing, and try to teach them more about Trout Unlimited and what we do for rivers. But I think that was 11 years ago now. So it's been a great ride for 10 years.
Yeah, very cool. And so, did you kind of, you had fished so much, you kind of had, guide folks in your family. Did you kind of immediately hang out your own shingle, or did you kind of come up through like the shop ecosystem in Michigan?
Kind of hung out my own sign and did my own thing. We had there wasn't a whole lot. There wasn't anybody offering anything in this area. So we had a few smaller rivers, and then of course people want to stay on the Manistee and the Asaba and hit the big names. But with smaller places like the Jordan and the Maple, lesser known rivers, they're a little bit easier to do some more wade fishing and get people introduced to the sport. So I think that was my in. One of the bigger things that helped me out I purchased an adipose from Montana, and I had the first adipose in Michigan. So anybody who wanted to see what one of these boats looked like, or if they wanted to row it, or if they wanted to go down the river and ride in one, they booked trips with me. So it was kind of, honestly, one of the best things I could have done. If I would have had a hide or a clack, I would have been just another guide with a hide. So it helped me stand out, and it definitely made me a little bit different. But the boat was also perfectly designed for the rivers that I fished. The Jordan, smaller, a little bit more intimate. A lot of cedars, a lot of overhanging trees. I need to have that lower profile skiff so I could slide underneath some of that structure.
Yeah, and as we were talking about before we started recording, on windy days, it doesn't catch as much wind either.
It doesn't turn me around. It doesn't push me. There's so many benefits to it. And it's such a stable boat for a lot of my older clients that I tell a lot of people if they have hip or knee issues, they realize at the end of the day, they forgot that they were in a boat for 8 hours, which is probably one of the best things that you can say about being in a boat.
Yeah, absolutely. And, even though you were, you kind of just put your shingle out there and went for it, are there some folks that have mentored you on your guide journey?
Oh, absolutely. Just because I was networked with them, volunteering through Trout Unlimited, I worked with a lot of fly shops, donating trips, and I helped organize the Trout Unlimited 50th anniversary, where we took a lot of guests from across the country and put them on the river and showed them a little bit of northern Michigan. So there were fly shops across northern Michigan. Of course, there's always a few guides that are willing to give and interject opinions when they're not necessarily needed, but that's how it always is.
Yeah, absolutely. Do any mentors in particular stand out?
Ray Schmidt was super helpful. So was Bear Andrews. Both of those guys, floated with both of them. They would tell me a lot of the do's and don'ts. There's certain river systems, especially like the Asaba, where they see so much traffic and see so many boats and so many people that you've got to be really careful who you anchor next to and who you go by and who you say hi to and it's such a different world. That's why I really love the Manistee. Everybody on the Manistee is much more friendly. And when you go by somebody and ask them how the fishing's going, they actually say, "Hey, pretty good. How's it going for you?" It's a much more friendly camaraderie on the Manistee instead of a competitive cutthroat. It's a better atmosphere altogether.
Yeah, when you talk about that, it reminds me of fishing the Beaverhead.
Yes.
You have people walking out of the bushes. You have people, clogging up the river for an hour to fish a hole. Yeah.
And these days with kayaks and paddle boards, and there's more recreational users on every river than there were 20 years ago. And we're coming out of the pandemic. There's more guides now because you didn't have to go through all the same loopholes we used to have to go through as far as getting state land use permits and getting insured. Anybody can be a guide now because there's nobody checking. In Michigan, it's a little bit funny.
Yeah, that's how it is here in North Carolina too. I think literally you just give Fish and Game $35 a year and you're a fishing guide.
Yep. That's pretty much all it takes. And all you have to do is watch a YouTube video and you got it all figured out. Right?
Yeah. Well,
it's like changing your light bulb on your Honda SUV. It's just watch a video and you can figure it out.
Yeah, it's interesting because since I've fished for a while, I sometimes, get called upon to kind of help or coach people that are going out west. And, to your point, you have to warn them about those kids that kind of go out and they basically go out a week before they start taking clients and they learn how to float like one section of the river and not wreck the boat.
If they're lucky.
Yeah. And that's where you're going to fish, whether the fishing is good or bad. So I totally hear what you're saying.
And every river has its pluses and minuses, and every section has its time of the year that it shines. And then the rest of the year, you might as well just, float a bobber with nothing underneath it because nothing's in there. And I'm a little bit concerned about that right now. And I'll save that for later, but our temperatures right now and our water levels here in Michigan, August is going to be, I'm scared.
Yeah. Well, it's dry here in the mid-Atlantic too. And we've gotten our first good pop of heat a little bit early, I would say.
Well, I think our biggest issue was we were 4 feet low for snowpack in northern Michigan. And so far this spring, we've only received 2 inches of rain, and we should have had somewhere between 8 and 9 inches. So we're definitely in the deficit, 7 inches of rain and 4 feet of snow. It's good because the Great Lakes levels are going down, but the Manistee in front of my cabin right now looks like it's August level, and it's the end of May. So it's going to be a long summer. I think we're going to see a lot of rivers shut down. Temperatures, we're going to be right back to where we were last year, and more than 50% of the rivers will be shut down. That puts a lot of stress on the few rivers that stay cold.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one thing, I always do when we have guides on the show is ask them to share what they think the biggest misconception people have about the life of a fishing guide.
The biggest misconception my wife says is that we eat fish all the time. Everybody always asks her, so you guys eat fish? No, we never eat fish unless it's walleye and somebody caught it and they brought it to me. The biggest misconception in my world is that I actually get to fish. I'm on the water a lot, but rarely if ever is the rod in my hand. This year I did take a couple extra days off so that I can fish with myself and buddies, just because that's what we need to do in order to keep our sanity and enjoy what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you were talking earlier and that, you really kind of took the deep dive with True North Trout about 10 years ago. But my recollection is that the company is almost 20 years old, right?
That is true. But it was kind of handed over to me on a silver platter. There was a gentleman named Jordan Lindbergh who started the blog, the True North Trout blog. And he called me up and asked if I'd be interested in taking over the writing portion of it. He was networked in with Northern Angler and other fly shops in Northern Michigan, but he wanted to retire and go to Florida and do, he does cremation services and online e-fulfillment services. So he wanted to hand it over to somebody who was pretty dialed in with Michigan rivers and had his pulse on what was going on with Trout Unlimited and all that. So he found me and asked me if I'd be willing to take over and do the writing for it. I'm not a prolific writer by any means, and I don't consider myself to be a writer, but my wife said it would be a good experience for me to do. And so I picked it up and maintained and pushed it to where it is today. There's a lot more people that know what True North Trout is. I think and it was luckily for me, a lot of people say that, getting into guiding, if you have a Facebook page and Instagram page, you can do it. I think I got in at the right time where it definitely did not hurt that both of those social media outlets helped me progress to get to a level where I've got 5,000 followers on each, and I can reach a pretty good audience, although we try to avoid the grip and grins and we try to keep it more on the what's happening in the state, the chumming laws, the grayling issue, all those other hot topics seem to generate a lot of views. But we try to keep focused on the conservation of what's going on in the state of Michigan and the Great Lakes in general.
Yeah, very neat. And so you wrote for about 10 years before you kind of completely converted True North Trout into your guide service?
I was writing and guiding at the same time. It kind of just went hand in hand. It made sense to, do like reviews or do a fly tying video and still guide at the same time. I mean, the primary season of your guide year is May through October. What are you going to do the rest of the year? I wasn't sales repping yet, so I was working in a restaurant, and the wintertime was a great time for me to do writing, do some reviews, do some reading, do some fly tying, and then in the summertime, we're on the river, we're fishing.
Got it. And you've also got several guys working with you, right?
Yep. For a while, I had 3 or 4 different guides that were underneath me. Now it becomes a point. I've got a buddy, Sam, who's up in Petoskey, Dakota, who also guides. There's 3 or 4 other local guides that I can refer people out to. It becomes a point where somebody hits Google and they look fly fishing Northern Michigan and True North Trout shows up. So they give me a call. I'm already booked, but I'm happy to help and try to put somebody in the right direction so that they can get a Northern Michigan experience.
Got it. And speaking of a Northern Michigan experience, I've been lucky enough to fish in the state. It's probably one of the fishiest and, most outdoor sport oriented places I think I've ever been.
And, it's funny because I was fishing with Mr. Dieter last week, and he said that he got a lot of heat one time when he put Michigan in the top 3 fishing states in the country. And he's like, why? Because anybody can go to Montana and catch 20 fish or, insert whatever state you want. But come to Michigan and float down the river and work the wood all day long to get your 20-incher Michigan's a fishy place, but you got to put in your time and you got to put in the effort. It doesn't just come handed over to you like a birthday gift. There's definitely some work that gets involved, but it's also very rewarding at the same time.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting, right? Cause the entire state's basically a big sandy peninsula. And so, to your point, you got a lot of timber in the water, not uncommon to have, kind of tannic stained water, but also, there's a lot more, sandy bottom structure than maybe in some other places, right?
Correct. That also, because of our stream flows are fairly constant, because a lot of that water is groundwater bubbling up through an aquifer or from springs. There's a lot of sandy section, but then there'll be a gravel section. Then there'll be a deep, long, slow, low gradient, muddy, murky, silty section. But that's also what gives us our diversity in the macroinvertebrates. So we have some of our rivers are some of the healthiest bug rivers that you can find. And some rivers that shouldn't be super good bug rivers because they're fairly sterile, they still produce a lot of bugs.
And I would imagine too, kind of the different, slack water, riffle water, sandy, not as much structure water also gives you a little bit more species diversity too, right? Yes.
All depending on the temperature variant, but there's been a few times when we've caught a walleye by accident, or you catch a smallmouth in bigger, we call it frog water, the bigger, slower water, but big brown trout tend to like to live at the northern end of their temperature range where other brook trout don't want to live, but that's why they get big, because they're eating crayfish. They're eating other fish.
Yeah. And speaking of, it's not just trout, you've got other species, talk a little bit about kind of, the arc of your fishing season in terms of, the species and the hatches. Cause I think people would find that super interesting.
It really is, because as soon as we get ice out, April, we can float most of our rivers 12 months of the year, even the coldest month, February, but your stuff might freeze up. The river may get locked up, but there's generally a section of water that's open. You can throw streamers or go nymphing, And that's generally going to be a trout situation. But once the lakes unfreeze or the ice is off, we can start targeting pike, bass, smallmouth especially, the Great Lakes, all of our inland bays that we have from Grand Traverse Bay, East Bay, all the way up to Mackinac. We were up near Mackinac City catching smallmouth. 20 inches is an average fish, and they're 5 to 6 pound. They're lake fish, and they're super aggressive. They're pre-spawn. They're looking to get fed, and they're also very hot and angry. Right about now, we're going to start to see a warm-up. The first couple weeks in June, the carp should be moving in on the flats. Carp fishing on the fly it sounds not attractive to a lot of people until you do it, and that is one of the legit fish in Michigan that will get you to your backing in seconds. They don't. There's no joke when you call it the mud bones of the flats. And northern Michigan has some 30-pound torpedo carp in the Great Lakes that will get you. They'll definitely test all of your skill and line control. As the season gets better, May I think is one of our best months because we're just seeing the start of a lot of our bugs hatching. We had mahoganies this week, lessers and graders. Hendricksons obviously were a couple weeks ago. That was an early hatch because we had a very warm spring and lack of snow again. Right now we're seeing some bigger sulfurs. This week we're hoping to see the drakes. Brown drakes are going to start popping. Gray drakes on some select rivers like the Muskegon, which is a little bit further south, but the gray drake hatch can be awesome because it's a daytime hatch and you can catch some awesome brown trout. As the summer progresses and we get through the hex, ISOs, one of my favorite hatches because they're pretty consistent when they come off and the bigger fish will key in on them. Later on in summer, if it gets too warm on these rivers, we're going to start moving to smallmouth bass and fishing the lower ends of a lot of these rivers, or we can move into lakes. You know, June can be a month. I can wake up and say, in the morning, let's go fish bluegills. We'll get them off beds. We can have them tonight for dinner, and then we can go hit a bass lake or a pike lake, and then in the evening go hit a brown drake hatch and catch brook trout or brown trout. It's one of the most amazing states to be able to catch so many different species all in the same day. And we haven't even touched on the Atlantics that we have up in the Sault Ste. Marie, Atlantic salmon. We have some in Torch. And then there's an awesome muskie fishery over in St. Clair. So a lot of guys are chasing 60-inch muskie down there. I haven't done that yet. I haven't chased the fish of 10,000 casts, but I hope one day I can build up my stamina to go play that game.
Yeah, very neat. And what about steelhead?
Steelhead. I totally didn't even mean to miss over steelhead and salmon, an anadromous species. You know, in the fall, we've got Atlantics and we have cohos moving in our rivers, and behind them, of course, the browns are eating their eggs, and steelhead will follow in as well. And a lot of steelhead will stay all winter long, and then they have their primary run in the spring. The Great Lakes have had their ups and downs. I mean, it's a fragile ecosystem, and we don't have as much zooplankton because of the zebra mussels and the quagga mussels, but we're seeing better numbers, better size, and a better overall fishery in the salmonids. And we're talking salmon and steelhead. Although a lot of people are concerned about the Muskegon River, they're seeing less numbers of steelhead. And there's a big argument. The fly guys are saying it's the bait guys. The bait guys are saying it's the charter guys. Biologists are kind of questioning maybe it's because of the higher water, and when the smolt are trying to get back out to the big lakes, they're getting eaten by predatory fish like walleye and pike. Because as the lake levels are high, a lot of the areas where the river dumps into the lake have a lot more predatory fish.
Yeah, interesting. And is your steelhead fishing, you know, do they behave differently than, let's say, you know, on the Lake Erie side?
You know, the Lake Erie side, it is a different fishery because those are all shorter, faster, quick run-out rivers, but they're still just big rainbow trout. I think the difference is, and there's a difference between fishing the Pigeon or the Sturgeon River as opposed to fishing the Pure Marquette. You've got a 120-mile-long river versus a 40 or 60-mile-long river. The fish they still like the same type of water. You know, they want that 7 to 9 feet per second flow. They're going to stay in something that's moving. And the more times you bounce an egg or a stonefly or whatever favorite pattern that you have, I think it's a temperature regulated game. They get aggressive and fast between 48 and 51 degrees, and that's when steelhead fishing can be hot. Whether it's sunny or cloudy, it's hard to predict. But again, the only way you're going to find out is by going. You can't sit on the couch and predict if the steelhead fishing is going to be awesome today or not.
Yeah, and it'll be better than any day at the office, right?
Yeah, I agree with that, except, with the COVID thing, again, we've had more people at Tippy Dam than record numbers. Everybody's showing up to go fishing because they've got nothing else better to do. So you definitely have to get your spot in line, and it becomes a procession waiting to get to the next spot. One boat picks up an anchor and moves out, and then 3 boats slide down. Everybody slides down.
Yeah.
So you need...
Yeah, that's even before you, at least, I've fished over on the Lake Erie side. That's even before you have to worry about the Canadians and the center pinners.
Correct. You want to talk about a very effective method. The center pinners, they have it dialed down.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And, to talk a little bit more about the guiding thing, and then we'll talk about the manufacturer's rep game. Tell folks a little bit about what a day on the water with you or one of your other guides is like.
We like to try to keep it, I want to say that we like to keep it local. I take special pride in the fact that most of my life was service industry. So we will go to the farmer's market and get fresh fruit or cheeses, and I'll usually buy a sandwich, subs or something from a local deli in town. There's a French bakery in town that I get scones and crepes from. We always bring scones on trips. And at the end of the day, it's not a Subway experience. You can go to Subway from Cleveland to Honolulu. It's always going to be the same. But when you're in northern Michigan, you're on the river, and your sense of smell, your sense of taste, your sense of everything is heightened because you're not getting bombarded by all these other noises and sounds. You're paying attention to where you're at. So I think having that experience is awesome. Try to fish and cater the river to the person's ability and level. A lot of people will call me up and say, "Hey, let's go fish the Jordan. I hear there's big fish there." I said, "Okay, then I'll meet you at 7:00 or 8:00. And then they ask, "You mean at night?" I said, "Yeah, you want to go catch big fish? We're going to go float at night." And then they reply with, "I've never fished at night before." I said, "Well, maybe we should work ourselves up to that. Let's do a day trip on the Manistee. It's going to be a little bit better for casting for you." You've got to really level your expectations with the client's expectations so that they don't walk into, "Well, this wasn't what I expected. I didn't think," I've taken out a lot of beginners that have only spin fished, and it's a totally different world learning how to read a river while you're moving because they still have a bass fishing mentality and they're casting behind the boat. So I want to try to condense my 40 years of knowledge into a couple of hours to try to give somebody the best advantage at trying to catch a 12-inch fish, right? It's easier than it sounds, but it's a lot more difficult and complicated when you get out there and you're actually trying to put everything together.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Like, I used to work with the local Project Healing Waters group and, other folks too, even people like say from the local federation or TU club, like maybe going out west. And, it's always amazing to me how reticent people are to tell their guide what they want to accomplish.
Right. That's what you want to do off the bat.
Yeah. I mean, I would always tell folks, I was like, guys, it's your day and it's your money. Like, you need to be really honest because, if you want to go whack 60 fish on an indicator, that's really different than catching 2 or 3 really big fish on streamers.
That is true.
Right.
And when you go out west, that's all they want to do is an indicator. And we're doing numbers. We want to get 20 fish in the boat. I'm like, no, I just want to catch 1 or 2 nice fish. That's my game. That's what I enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then the other thing too, is then people get that whole kind of social media numbers game in their head and they don't realize that, like you and I could go out and fish and it could be really tough and we could get like 3 or 4 fish and that's awesome.
I've said that many times. Somebody asked, they were new people a couple weeks ago and they're like, "So what's it like when you and a couple of fishing buddies go out and fish?" I'm like, it's fishing. Some days it's red hot and some days it doesn't matter. You can't buy a strike. You can't help Mother Nature along. I mean, you can do the best you can, but the weather, the water levels, the temperature, there's so many variables. It's nature. You just can't make them play.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I always tell people that, the trick is you want to ask yourself at the end of the day if everything that was humanly possible to put you on fish was done. And if the answer is yes, then you had a good day, even if you didn't catch any fish.
Yeah, you're on the water. And I've had some of my best clients that have been from Patagonia to Chile and Alaska, and they may not catch a fish at all. They don't care because they're on the water, and that's the relaxing part of the whole deal. When they get a fish, it's cliche to say it, but catching fish is just a bonus. Yeah, no,
it's crazy. I mean, I believe that too. Like, I'm not a big picture taker, right? Because I've seen it. So, every now and again I'll take a picture, and if it's one of my boys, I certainly will take a picture, but I don't do a lot of pictures.
And there's nothing wrong with that, because you've got the memory. That's kind of what this whole social media generation has been brought up on. We have to document pictures or it didn't happen. And I'm like, well,
not so much.
I've got a couple of clients that don't want their picture taken, and they don't want the fish taken out. They just want the hook removed and let the fish go. I'm like, I'm super happy to do that for you.
Yeah. And you also have to make sure you don't get your metadata in a secret spot, or you're kind of done. So that's becoming, and no matter what, whenever you post, I had one of my regular clients catch a really nice 25-inch fish a couple weeks ago, and he put on the grip glove, the fish mitt, and I don't want to post it because I know that everybody's going to comment about the fish glove. Like, everybody's a critic, right? As soon as you put it out there, everybody's going to let you know what you did wrong. Yeah.
Like, okay.
Yeah. Well, shifting gears a little bit, you wear a lot of hats, and one of the hats you wear is you're a manufacturer's representative. And, how did you break into the rep game, Koz?
Ray Schmidt was TFO, and he had been looking at me for a few years, asked me if I would like to bring on the brand and become a rep. And I just think that at this stage in my life, it's the perfect natural progression, and it fits in perfectly with what I do. I can take clients out like you and show you a brand new rod, and maybe turn you on into a new family of rods that you've never known or tried before. I like talking the talk and being at shows and talking with people. So Temple Forks is one of my brands. Just recently added Norvise about a month and a half ago. So I'm excited to get on the road this fall and show some people that the many qualities that Norvise can do for a new tire or old tires if you want to try and learn a new method. I also do Wind River gear. They have a lot of streamside accessories, Dreamcast flies, Fishy Wear from Alaska. She does a lot of really cool leggings, grayling, salmon, coho, bonefish prints, fun, attractive designs. And I also have Snowbee, because they have a great outdoor line of apparel.
Yeah, very neat. And I assume, you're an upper Midwest guy. So kind of what's your territory for those manufacturers?
Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, and Indiana. We keep toying around with the idea of Wisconsin and Minnesota, but the Great Lakes are kind of a very large obstacle. And most of our travel, I'm running around early in the spring or late in the fall to get everybody's orders. Today we're fielding phone calls because everybody's excited about what's coming in the fall from TFO, and they want to get the new rods. We're trying to hold off on major announcements until ICAST. And because of COVID, everything's a little bit goofed up. Shipping, getting stuff, containers from Korea to the U.S. They get to the U.S. and we can't get them unloaded. They're stuck at Long Beach. We can't get them to Dallas. Then we can't get them up here. We don't want to make promises and not deliver. So we're holding off until, I'm going to say, July to see new product in the States. But that works out good. September, October, you will see new rods in all of our dealers.
Got it. And, what about your other brands?
They have different setups because I think in the rod industry, everybody gets super keyed in and excited for what's coming for 2022, right? Fishyware has a couple of new patterns, so it's not like they're rewriting designing a whole new rod or anything. We're bringing in next year. We're looking at adding some men's apparel, and you might actually see some casual loungewear like fleecy pants and zip tops, so that men can wear some Fishyware. We might call it something else. We don't know yet. We're going to leave that on the table. But everybody's got a couple of changes, and I can't wait to see what we have coming out.
Yeah, so it sounds like maybe some of the other brands are kind of more what you would call kind of fly fishing groceries, right?
Yes, necessities.
Yeah. And so, how does, you were talking a little bit about, calling and talking to people today, but I also know you're getting primed for the hex hatch. So kind of how does this kind of weave itself into your fishing season? Is it, kind of handle it the best you can while you're guiding, and then you're going and kind of visiting shops and kind of doing the hand-to-hand work when the season's over?
Well, in Michigan, and especially the Midwest, a lot of fly shops don't really want to talk to you at the busiest time of the year. So it works out really good for me to lay low, do the guiding thing, June and July, come around in August when the fishing is really not that great because it's going to be 100 degrees out and the rivers will be warm. And I don't want to be on the river then anyway, and I can visit shops. So it all works out and balances pretty well. And then I'll make a few more rounds once we hit September and October as people start to get back in their back to school groove. Everything's changed in the industry in the past year and a half. It's been Zoom. And some fly shops, you don't know what their climate is before you walk in, whether they're pro-mask or anti-mask or vaxxers or no vaxxers, and you don't want to upset anybody. So you come in and you have to be very cautious about saying or doing anything. But at the same time, I don't want to avoid visiting a shop because they don't want to see you. But at the same time, I want to be there to be present, so it's a double-edged sword. This pandemic has shown different sides of consumers and dealers all at the same time.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because obviously the online presence, for like someone like Schultze has been huge, right? But I would think, for you as a rep, it's beneficial to go in, because I suspect there's some kind of business coaching that you can kind of do in addition to just kind of seeing what people carry and kind of what the vibe of a shop is.
Absolutely. And you want to be there in order to either assist the products that they have or to help have a better presence to get better footing within a dealer or in a shop. And like you mentioned, somebody like Schultze's or Mad River, those guys have such a great captive audience because they have strong social media, whether it's YouTube or Facebook or Instagram. Anybody who has a good web presence has had one of the best years ever in the past year. We've seen some fly shops close, but it wasn't necessarily due to a pandemic. They were going to close anyway. I think we're going to see that in a lot of businesses in the next couple of years, but it's kind of like we're shaking the tree and seeing what falls. And you don't want to spend a whole lot of time at a dealer that just wants to buy one or two things. You definitely need to pay attention to that shop that needs your assistance. Be there, but also don't forget that you've got this other account over here that orders 10,000 whatever. Make sure you're taking care of everybody. So I try to treat everybody fair and get to as many people as I can, but obviously some fly shops call more and they need more attention. Others don't, but everybody's different. Everybody runs their own business their own way.
Yeah, no, it's like I always tell people, if you have more than one kid, every kid's different, right? They're just hatched different.
Oh my gosh, yes they do. And they develop different.
Yeah.
And you can educate them or help them out along as best as you can, but you can't teach them how to ride a bike by riding a bike yourself. You got to let them do it.
Yep.
So there's a few other dealers that I keep insisting you've got to have some kind of presence. Nobody knows you exist. And they're like, how come we can't sell this rod? How come we can't? Have you tried this? No, that doesn't work. But have you tried it? Just give it a try. And then you can tell me it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But I know, it's just like having kids. That's a very good analogy.
Yeah, that's funny. And, we talked a little bit about COVID and kind of the impact that it's having on TFO getting stuff from Korea to the States. But, I think either people firsthand have experienced it or anecdotally they've heard about it. There's all kinds of disruptions for all kinds of different reasons related to COVID that have made it, hard to get tippet, hard to get fish hooks, tying materials, rods, lines, all sorts of stuff. Kind of what are you seeing and when do you think, we'll get back to something that's kind of normal where you can, always go and buy a, size 100 TMC 100?
Well, we didn't predict that this was going to last this long. The demand for the industry, the demand for all outdoor industries, whether it's biking or kayaking or hiking or camping, every outdoor industry has felt the crunch. I know with like TMC, that one little village that does that one specialized, the 105 or the 100, they make so many this month, and then next month they're making something else, and the next month they're making something else. It takes 3 months for them to come back around to making a certain size of something. I know that with the fly rods and the fly fishing, a lot of our componentry comes from China. Even though we make our rods in South Korea, we're waiting on a rod tube, or we're waiting on a resin, or we're waiting on something to get the whole package put together and get it over here. Some companies have switched manufacturing from whatever small componentry it was to make something for the medical field, or maybe they're making iPhone cases because they sell for $2 more than whatever their other product was. So there's a huge disruption in getting the parts that we need for everything, and then there's a disruption in the actual supply chain getting it over to the country, because our country right now has every shipping container in the world, and they're all full waiting to be unloaded because we don't have the staff or the manpower to get it done. We're in a very unique space. We also see the light at the end of the tunnel. I want to predict, if I had a magic ball, that the end of this summer will be when this bottoms out, it's going to bottom out, and we're not going to see the demand, but we want to keep riding the wave as long as we possibly can. But at the same time, we don't want to be left with 10,000 units on hand that nobody's going to buy. So we're being very cautious, and we're trying to watch the market. And, every shop is saying, send me more, send me double. I can sell it all. But once we send you double and the demand drops, you're going to be stuck with it all. So, it's a delicate balance, a tricky tightrope to walk right now. And kudos to all the companies that are out there working through this, because we all want to sell rods. That's what we do. And everybody thinks, well, why don't you just make more? Can't you make twice as many? Our factory only gets so much raw materials. We can only make so much and ship, let's say, whatever the number is, 5,000 rods a month. That's what we're at. We're actually up 20%. We're making 20% more than we make any other given year. And we just cannot get ahead of the demand. And I think everybody's the same way.
Yeah, it's an interesting, like you said, it's a really interesting multifaceted challenge, right?
On all levels.
Yeah. So, well, that's neat. And, we've talked a little bit about this, Koz, throughout the interview, and one of the things when I was preparing, I noticed that you're super active doing education and outreach. And I wanted, for folks that don't know you well, for you to tell us a little bit about what you're doing, but then also, it's clear that giving back and doing outreach and education is really important. If you could kind of talk to us a little bit about what motivates you to do all that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it goes back to my dad. He passed away April 26th, 10 years ago. And he was always a member of MUCC, Michigan United Conservation Corps, and Trout Unlimited and Ducks Unlimited. He was always sending in money to whatever group. And I think that definitely had an influence on me. I try to take it to the next level and be involved in those groups, whether it's BHA or Conservation Resource Alliance, Tip of the Mitt. I try to be involved and volunteer with as many of these groups as I possibly can. We also I started a salmon in the classroom program with one of our schools up here 12 years ago. We brought salmon eggs home and we raised them, and the kids got to let them go in the river, and they watched the salmon go from eggs to little bitty smolts. If we don't reach out to our kids in the next generation, who's going to care about the river after I'm gone? You know, it's like I look at my girls. I have an 8-year-old and a 16-year-old, and they love bugs. Everybody sees us walking around downtown, and we're collecting mayflies and putting them in a bug container. And all the locals think that the kids are freaks. I'm like, they're just mayflies. You know, it's what we do.
Yeah,
and
we're not collecting cockroaches, folks.
Right. And even if we were, there's something education would be learned about it. The school always calls me up to help out with field days because they know I'm the bug guy, and I'll take the kids down to the river and we'll turn over some rocks and look at stoneflies. I'm lucky. I'm blessed to live where I do, to have what I have, and I'm more than proud to share it with anybody who wants to take 5 minutes and learn about a river and catch a fish. And I think there's no better place for me to be in my life right now than where I am to do what I do. And I'm happy, and I feel blessed to be able to do it.
Yeah, that's really neat. And, you know, kind of a related question is, you know, I don't know anyone that likes to hunt and fish that says they've done it as much in a year as they want to, right? I think everyone always says, I didn't get out as much as I wanted.
Correct.
And you've been really lucky to not only, you know, fish as an avocation, but you've been able to, you know, have it occupy a large part of your professional life. And, you know, are there any words of advice you would give folks that want to kind of get that professional life and their outdoor passion aligned to kind of make that happen?
Don't wait. I wish that I could have had. I'm an alcoholic. I quit drinking 20 years ago. It's not an easy thing. And I throw that out there too easy and too often, but I've also helped a lot of people who struggle with addictions. And I wish when I was 22, I would have had the balls and the gumption to put down the bottle and go to Alaska or go to Patagonia or go wherever and travel and fish and do the things that I wasted way too much time in my youth that I'll never be able to get back. You know, it's like, man, I wish I would have tried doing what I do today when I was in my 20s. But I had to get my bumps, and I had to do what I did and learn. I had to learn the hard way, just like that kid riding a bike. I had to fall down a few times before I learned which way I wanted to go, but I wouldn't change it. And every day when I'm sitting at home, I'm looking outside right now. It's beautiful. I can smell the lilacs and the fresh blooming flowers and trees, and I'm happy to be here. And I know within 10 minutes I can go be on a river and go catch some fish, or just stand in the river and look around and enjoy where I'm at.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always interesting too, as I like to say, as you get a few more miles on your tires, you start to think about, you know, to your point, those things that are not as easy for you to do anymore, or, you know, trips that you need to take, because if you wait too long, you're not going to be able to take them.
Sure. Yeah. Definitely. It definitely takes a lot more to get stuff done today. And there's also the family obligations. We've got so much more that we want to take care of, and that's my priority.
Absolutely. And, you know, since you, as I like to say, you have, I think you and I are probably about the same age. So I think we probably have about the same tread, taking off our tires. Close. Yeah. Yep. So, just kind of curious, you know, you've been around the sport a long time, kind of your kind of thoughts on, you know, the changes that you've seen, and, you know, you've talked a little bit about kind of decreased engagement and what that means for conservation, but kind of those changes and kind of any concerns you have about the future of our sport.
You know, I think the changes that we've seen have been, a lot of people like to say there's so much negative with Facebook. You know, everybody's putting out pictures and we're showing all this, but at the same time, when we need help on a river, or when we need help on conservation because they're going to put a mine in, we seem to band together and work more efficiently and faster because of getting the word out, getting people aware, educating the public. I think that social awareness is a huge benefit. I also think as far as the industry goes, I think back to the first Abu Garcia, it was a fiberglass Abu Garcia rod that I had that maybe cost $200. Today wouldn't cost $10 because the materials that we're using it's light years ahead. We can get a kid outfitted with a $200 combo today that would have cost $1,000 20 years ago. It's what a great time to be alive. We have so many great resources. We have so many great rivers. And I think we have a lot of people that are out paying attention, taking care of, and being better river stewards than we had even in the 80s. I mean, we were throwing garbage bags out our car window as we drove down the road. And now we see a lot more people that are being a lot more ethical and conservation minded about what we do and everything that we do. We're teaching our kids how to be better recyclers in every little step of their life, because if we don't, this whole planet's going to be one big dump. So there's a lot of brightness that I see in the future. We're a long way from getting it all figured out, but at the same time, kick plastic. I bring my Nalgene bottle with me everywhere I go, and I carry my own water, and I try to encourage everybody else to bring their own when they come on a trip. Educating people as we go along. It's the best thing that we can do, being guides and being on the water and taking care of our resources.
Yeah, absolutely. And, before I let you hop tonight, Koz, why don't you let folks know where they can find you on the internet and on social media so they can follow your fishing adventures and also maybe call you and book you and fish with you?
Absolutely. You can find me at truenorthtrout.com, also Instagram and Facebook at True North Trout. And you can give me a call at 231-675-1237. I'm Northern Michigan, up in Boyne City on the beautiful Lake Charlevoix. Love to get people out on the water.
Absolutely. And I'll drop all that stuff in the show notes for folks.
Sounds great.
Awesome. Well, listen, Koz, I super appreciate you carving an hour out of your post-fishing day to chat with me.
Excellent. I thank you, and I appreciate sharing some time with you. It's always great talking to you. It's almost like we've known each other for 100 years.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you added our age together, we'd be close to 100.
You're right.
Well, listen, take care, and I'll see you soon.
Excellent. You too. Take care.
Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed that as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. Again, if you like the podcast, please tell a friend, and please leave us a rating and review in the podcatcher of your choice. And don't forget to head on over to www.nor-vice.com to check out those new shank jaws. Tight lines, everybody.